Think about your most vivid childhood memory, the one you've replayed so many times you could almost describe the smell of the room. Now here's what nobody tells you. The more you've remembered it, the less accurate it probably is. And that's not a metaphor, that's chemistry. Here's what this video is actually about. Your memory doesn't work like a recording. It works more like a document that gets rewritten every single time you open it. Most people assume memory is unreliable because of forgetting, because time fades the details. But the science says something stranger. Consolidated memories can re-enter states of transient instability following reactivation, from which they must again stabilize in order to persist. In other words, the act of remembering something is literally the thing that puts it at risk. We're going to walk through exactly how that works, why scientists have used it to wipe specific memories from people's minds, and why one of the most famous memory studies ever done might have been getting the whole thing backwards. The last one especially, almost nobody is talking about it. Let's start with something that sounds backwards. Most people think the more you remember something, the more accurate it becomes. Like a muscle, the more you use it, the stronger it gets. And in one specific way, that's true. The reactivation of a memory through re-exposure to salient training stimuli results in its destabilization, necessitating a restabilization process known as reconsolidation, and a disruption of which leads to amnesia, so the memory has to go unstable before it can get stronger. It has to temporarily fall apart so it can be rebuilt. A 2008 study found that this reconsolidation process isn't just a side effect. It's actually the mechanism your brain uses to strengthen a memory at all. Simply being reminded of something doesn't do the same job. The memory has to go through that chemical resave process, or the strengthening doesn't happen. But here's what makes that uncomfortable. During the resave, the memory is vulnerable. The restabilization of a memory, either in its identical form or with additional characteristics, is considered to take place over a relatively long period of time, hours or even days. And anything that happens in that window, a conversation you have right after, something you read, even how you're feeling, can bleed into the memory before it finishes locking back in. There's roughly a 5 to 6 hour window after a memory gets reactivated where it's still open, still editable, and you have no idea it's happening. So every time you've sat around with family and talked about an old trip, or looked at old photos, or just thought about something that happened, you were reopening the file, and the version that saved afterward wasn't necessarily the same version you started with. Now here's where it gets even more specific, because scientists didn't just observe this, they used it deliberately. Researchers found that if you reactivate a memory and then interrupt the restabilization process at exactly the right moment, you can erase that specific memory in humans without touching anything else around it. Not a general wipe, not brain damage. One targeted memory, gone. Memory reconsolidation is the process in which reactivated long-term memory becomes transiently sensitive to amnesic agents. And one of the most striking findings in this area is a study by Lee in 2008, who devised specific tools to block consolidation or reconsolidation mechanisms. This isn't science fiction, it's a documented lab technique, and it raises an obvious question. If you can erase a memory that precisely, can you also edit one? Can you change what it means without deleting it entirely? Yes. And that's actually already being done. Researchers described a memory retrieval extinction procedure that decreases conditioned drug effects and drug seeking, and in heroin addicts, retrieval of drug-associated memories. 10 minutes before extinction sessions, attenuated Q induced heroin craving, 130 and 180 days later. The key detail is the timing. In rats, daily retrieval of drug-associated memories, 10 minutes or 1 hour, but not 6 hours before extinction sessions, attenuated drug-induced reinstatement, spontaneous recovery, and renewal of conditioned drug effects. Miss the window, and the treatment doesn't work. Hit it, and cravings that had been there for years dropped and stayed down for at least 6 months. They didn't change what happened to these people. They changed the emotional charge the memory carried, and that distinction matters a lot, because it means memory editing isn't just a lab curiosity. Since its rediscovery, memory reconsolidation has been proposed as a therapeutic target for reducing the impact of emotional memories that can go awry in mental health disorders, including drug addiction, which can be conceptualized as a disorder of learning and memory. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's a twist in the middle of all this, and here it is. Everything we've talked about so far makes memory sound like it's always soft and always editable. That's actually the narrative most content about memory pushes, but the real picture is more complicated. In most human studies, reactivating a memory doesn't make it weaker. It makes it more robust. Reactivation of apparently stable, long-term memory can render it fragile and dependent on a restabilization process. But recently, the first demonstration of reconsolidation effects in human episodic memory showed the conditions under which this actually occurs are specific. And there's an age factor too. Research found that memories that were 1 day or 7 days old could be disrupted after being recalled, but memories that were 28 days old could not. At some point, the editing window closes. The memory goes from editable to fixed, and we don't fully know when that happens for each person or for each type of memory. So the picture isn't every memory is fragile every time you touch it. It's more like there's a window. The window is real, but it has limits, and those limits aren't the same for everyone. Which brings us to the part of this that almost nobody talks about honestly: the false memory research. You've probably heard that false memories are easy to implant. That someone can suggest a fake event from your childhood and you'll start to believe it happened. The famous study behind this claim is the Lost in the Mall experiment, where participants were told they'd been lost in a mall as a child, and a portion of them started remembering it. The study suggested that it is easy to implant false memories for a fake event that never happened. After 25% of the 24 participants wrongly recalled being lost in a supermarket at the age of 5. That study was replicated in 2023 with a much larger group. Overall, 35% of participants reported full or partial false memories for the target event. So the number went up. More people, more false memories. That's the headline most places stop at. But then independent researchers went back and looked at the raw data, which had never been made publicly available before, and found something that changes the whole story. None of the 35% judged to have a false memory in 2023 reported an entirely false memory, and many did not even recall being lost. And here's the part that flips the narrative completely. According to the new analysis, half of those judged to have false memories had actually been lost before and were likely to be reporting on real events, albeit at a different time or place. So what looked like a false memory was often a real memory, just mislabeled by the researchers. The participants weren't making things up. They were pulling up a genuine experience that happened to be categorized as fabricated because the details didn't match the specific story they'd been told. And this matters way beyond a psychology paper. The 1995 Lost in the Mall study has often been cited in criminal trials, particularly those involving historical sexual abuse, including by Harvey Weinstein's defense team, in order to cast doubt on the memory of accusers. The science was used in court to suggest that people can't trust their own memories of real events. These results highlight the need for caution when applying memory research in legal settings to avoid misleading the justice system. That's not a footnote. That's the real-world cost of oversimplifying how memory works. Now here's what the data actually says when you look across all the studies together. Using a standardized scheme across 8 peer-reviewed implantation studies, 30.2% of cases were classified as false memories, and another 23% were classified as having accepted the event to some degree. So roughly 1 in 3 people absorb some distorted version of a suggested event. But the key word is some. Participants who were deemed to have a false memory recalled on average 1.5 details with any confidence, and 30% recalled none at all. They weren't constructing full fabricated scenes, they were filling in fragments. Their brain's autofill kicked in and stitched together something that felt real from pieces that weren't. That's not the same as inventing an entire memory from scratch, and the difference matters. So here's where all of this lands. Your memory isn't a recording. It's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, your brain is rebuilding it from available materials, and some of those materials get swapped out without you noticing. The act of remembering something can make it stronger, but it also reopens it to influence. There's a window where new information can bleed in. That window closes over time, but we don't know exactly when. And the false memory story is more complicated than it's been presented, because what looks like fabrication is often a real memory wearing the wrong label. That's a meaningfully different picture than your memory is unreliable. It's more specific than that. It's not that you can't trust your memories, it's that you should understand what they actually are. They're not files, they're reconstructions. And the last time you thought about your childhood, you were doing the reconstruction again. If that made you think of something you want to test on your own memory, drop it in the comments. Seriously, I'm curious what comes up for people when they actually sit with this. And if you want to keep going down this rabbit hole, the video on why you can't remember being a toddler connects directly to everything we just talked about. The mechanism is different, but the conclusion is the same. Your brain has been editing your story for a lot longer than you think.